Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
Glad to be here.
I'm so glad you're joining us today. If you're settling in for this deep dive, you likely have a pretty healthy curiosity about how things actually work,
Right.
as opposed to, how we are simply told they work.
Exactly.
And our mission today is to step entirely away from that frantic, surface-level churn of the daily news cycle.
Yeah, we're definitely not looking at the headlines today.
No, not at all. Instead, we're going to map the invisible architecture of global influence that sits underneath all those headlines.
Mm-hmm.
And to do this, we're using a really fascinating piece of source material as our entry point. It's David Rothkopf's book, Superclass, The Global Power Elite and the World They Are Making.
It is an incredible text to use as a lens.
It really is.
And right at the top, I think it is critical to frame the core system we are examining today, just to sort of orient you.
Please do.
According to Rothkopf's analysis, what we are looking at is a massive mechanism of transnational elite network governance.
Transnational elite network governance.
Right. Now, to be clear, this is not a traditional book review.
No.
And we are emphatically not embarking on a hunt for shadowy cabals or secret handshakes.
Right. No movie villain conspiracies here.
Exactly. The author's focus, and our focus today, is strictly structural. We are going to map the highly informal, profoundly relationship-driven coordination that occurs across state, corporate, and institutional domains.
So crossing all those traditional boundaries.
Yes. And the book makes the case that this network shapes global policy and global outcomes almost entirely outside of direct democratic oversight.
Okay, let's unpack this with a quick analogy just to get us grounded.
Sure.
Imagine you are trying to understand the flow of traffic in a massive, sprawling metropolis, like, say, Los Angeles or Tokyo.
Okay.
If you only look at the individual cars.
The daily commute.
Right. The drivers getting cut off, the minor fender benders, the taxis weaving in and out of lanes.
You're just looking at the daily news.
Exactly. You can describe what's happening second by second, but you are entirely missing the underlying reality of why it's happening.
Because you aren't seeing the design.
Right. To truly understand the traffic, you have to ignore the cars and look at the highway designers. You have to look at the algorithms running the traffic lights.
The civil engineers.
The civil engineers who calculated the load-bearing capacity of the bridges. The city planners who decided decades ago exactly where the off-ramps go.
Yeah.
Today, according to the framework provided by our source material, we're looking at the highway designers of global power.
That is a highly effective way to visualize it. And what the author is examining is this concept of the superclass.
Right.
According to the systemic analysis in the book, we are looking at a highly concentrated group of roughly 6,000 individuals worldwide.
6,000.
Yeah. To put that demographic into perspective, that is exactly 1 in a million people on the planet.
1 in a million. That is incredibly small.
It is. And over the course of this deep dive, we are going to break down exactly how the author claims this 6,000-person system is designed.
We'll look at the blueprint.
Right. We will explore its internal incentive architecture, its highly predictable structural outcomes, the reasons why the system persists despite its lack of formal democratic legitimacy, and how all of its disparate parts interconnect.
And I should mention that near the end, we are going to pull all of these threads together to ask the core question of this show, which is, what is the ultimate crisis in perception that this system creates for the average citizen?
Absolutely.
But before we get there, I want to jump right into these numbers, because the book mentions there are roughly 6,000 people in this group.
Yes.
Did the author figure out who these people actually are? Like, is there a common profile? Because 6,000 people running the globe sounds like an impossibly small number. But at the same time, it is way too many people to be sitting around a single mahogany table stroking white cats.
Right. It's not a Spectre meeting from James Bond.
Yeah.
And the author actually provides a very helpful historical contrast to help us understand who these people are. The book points back to the 1950s.
Okay.
That's when the sociologist C. Wright Mills coined a very famous concept called the power elite.
The power elite. Right.
Mills analyzed the power structure of the United States at that time and found a remarkably small, overlapping echelon of deciders.
Deciders at the top tiers.
Right, at the top tiers of business, government, and the military. They went to the same prep schools, they sat on the same corporate boards, and they function as what Mills called an interlocking directorate.
Wait, before we go further, what exactly does interlocking directorate mean in a practical sense? That sounds a bit like an academic buzzword.
Fair point. In a practical sense, an interlocking directorate simply means that the same small group of people are sitting on the boards of directors of multiple different companies or institutions simultaneously.
Oh, I see.
So the CEO of a major bank might sit on the board of a massive automobile manufacturer, and the CEO of that auto manufacturer might sit on the board of a major university.
And then the president of the university sits on the board of the bank.
Exactly. They are legally distinct entities, but the leadership is a shared, overlapping social circle.
Ah, got it. So they're essentially sharing notes and aligning their general worldview because they are constantly in the same boardrooms together.
Precisely the point Mills was making. But here is where Rothkopf's analysis diverges and updates that concept for the modern era.
Because the 50s were a long time ago.
Right. Mills' power elite in the 1950s was strictly national.
It was just the U.S.?
Yes, it was bound by the borders of the United States, and it was tied directly to formal, recognizable domestic institutions.
Okay.
The modern superclass, as described in our sources, is structurally distinct in a very profound way.
How so?
It is transnational, it is highly mobile, and most importantly, it operates across fragmented, overlapping global jurisdictions where no single national government has ultimate authority.
So globalization has fundamentally changed the blueprint. And the text actually conducted a sort of informal census of these 6,000 individuals to see who has successfully navigated into this transnational system.
They did.
What do those demographics look like?
The author's findings are quite staggering. If you want to fit the profile of this group, the systemic design heavily favors a very specific set of characteristics.
Okay.
First, the text notes that you are overwhelmingly likely to be a man. According to the book's research at the time of publication, only about 6% of the superclass is female.
6%.
Second, you are almost certainly a baby boomer. The median age hovers around 58, with very few members under 40.
Makes sense.
Third, you trace your cultural roots to North America or Europe, which together account for over half of the entire group.
Half the group from just those two regions.
Right. And fourth, you almost certainly attended a tiny handful of elite universities. We're talking about places like Harvard, Stanford, or the University of Chicago.
That is a deeply filtered demographic. It's not just a random assortment of people who happen to invent a good product or inherit some money.
No, it is a highly specific pathway.
But the book also makes a point that being incredibly rich isn't enough to get you into this club, right?
That is correct.
There are plenty of billionaires who don't make the cut for the superclass.
That is a crucial distinction the author makes. Influence in the system is not merely about possessing vast personal wealth.
It's not just about the money.
No. To project power globally, the book argues that you require what is called an institutional power base.
An institutional power base, meaning what exactly?
Meaning you must sit atop a multinational corporation, command a massive private equity fund, run a global media empire, or lead a top-tier religious or military organization.
So you have to pull the levers of a massive machine.
Exactly. The individual is powerful because they direct the massive capital, the expansive networks, and the sweeping agendas of these global institutions. A billionaire who just sits on a yacht and manages their own family wealth is certainly rich, but they don't have the leverage to shape global policy. They lack that institutional power base.
This brings us to a fascinating mechanism detailed in the source material. How this power is actually wielded through what the author calls the crossover elite.
Yes, the crossover elite.
The text gives us this incredible, specific example of Stephen Schwarzman, the head of the Blackstone Group.
A perfect example.
And I want to map his connections for a second because it perfectly illustrates the system.
Oh.
First, for anyone who might not know, Blackstone is a massive financial firm, specifically a private equity firm. They buy companies, restructure them, manage real estate, and control hundreds of thousands of employees globally.
It is a behemoth.
If Blackstone were a traditional industrial company, it would be in the Fortune 20. But Schwarzman isn't just in finance.
No, he is not.
The book points out that he has also sat on the board of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and he has deep links to the Asia Society.
Yeah.
Now, on the surface, looking at the daily news level, you might think, oh, he's just a rich guy who appreciates ballet and likes to read about foreign affairs.
And the author would argue that is a fundamental misreading of how power operates.
The complete misreading.
Yes. If we analyze Schwartzman's bio through the lens of this book, These crossover roles are not mere hobbies. They are not vanity projects. They are, in fact, institutional infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like the highway designers we talked about earlier.
Precisely.
How does sitting on the board of a ballet company act as infrastructure?
Think about the environment of those boardrooms. When you sit on the board of a major cultural institution like the Kennedy Center or an international policy society, who is in the room with you?
Well, not the general public.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are placed in a room with other heads of state, other billionaires, top media executives, and leading academics from around the world. By occupying these intersecting cultural, financial, and political spaces, the author argues that elites dramatically reduce their degrees of separation.
So they shrink the world.
They create an exclusive, insulated environment where informal relationships can be forged and maintained.
Okay, I see where this is going. It's the old golf course networking concept, but scaled up to a planetary level.
Exactly, but with much higher stakes. The key takeaway from the book is that these individuals then translate those informal relationships into durable influence and governance capacity.
Across public and private boundaries.
Right. Let's say a massive private equity firm needs to navigate a multi-billion-dollar investment in China.
Okay.
The formal diplomatic channels might be slow, they might be bogged down by trade wars or human rights disputes.
Sure, treaties take years.
But the relationships forged through the Asia Society or through global cultural exchanges or philanthropic galas, those become the informal, high-speed pathways through which that business is actually conducted.
So the cultural board isn't just about art.
No, it's a node in a global network.
It is a totally porous world at that level. The boundary between business, art, and statecraft just dissolves completely.
It does.
And to maintain those relationships, you need physical places to actually meet.
I do.
This brings us to what the sources call the village greens of the superclass. We are talking about these massive elite convenings.
The World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland.
Right. The Bilderberg meetings, the Buao Forum in Asia.
Yes.
Now, I have to be honest, if you spend 5 minutes on the internet searching for these groups, the surface interpretation immediately devolves into the most wild conspiracy theories imaginable.
Oh, absolutely.
You get YouTube videos talking about secret world domination, puppet masters, and dark rituals in the woods.
Which is why the author spends a significant amount of time addressing this. We have to firmly replace the conspiracy framing with a systems framing.
Systems framing.
Yes. When commentators and internet sleuths hunt for secret plots, the book argues they completely miss how the system actually functions in reality.
Because they're looking for a crime.
Right. These convenings matter immensely, but not because anyone is sitting in a smoke-filled room voting on how to oppress the global population. Right. They matter because they act as coordination hubs. The power being exercised at Davos or Bilderberg is mostly visible, it is entirely normalized, and it is completely legal.
So if it's visible and legal, why does it feel so shady to the average person? Where does that sense of opacity actually come from?
According to Rothkopf, the opacity doesn't come from illegal secrecy. It comes from informality.
Informality.
Think about how a formal treaty is negotiated. It takes years, there are public hearings, journalists review drafts, and legislators actually vote on it.
It's slow and public.
It is a highly formal, incredibly slow process. Now contrast that with Davos. You have CEOs, prime ministers, and central bankers bumping into each other in the hallway of a Swiss hotel.
Right.
They grab a 15-minute coffee. In that informal setting, they engage in agenda convergence, signaling, recruitment, and coalition formation.
So you're just getting on the same page.
Yes. They figure out what ideas are considered sound economics for the coming year. They identify who the rising political stars are, and they figure out how to align their immense institutional resources towards shared goals.
It is the informality that makes it opaque to the public, not a criminal conspiracy.
Precisely.
And the book gives this incredibly vivid historical anecdote that really drives this home. It's about the Davos Pact of 1996.
A perfect illustration.
Let me set the scene here because this blew my mind, and it perfectly illustrates what you're talking about with coalition formation.
Go for it.
It's early 1996. Boris Yeltsin is the president of Russia, but his approval ratings are in the single digits.
He was incredibly unpopular.
Right. He's facing a massive re-election threat from the Communist Party candidate, Gennady Zyuganov. And the stakes are existential here.
Highly existential.
Because if the communists win, the entire rapid privatization of the Russian economy, which had essentially handed the country's massive state-owned assets to a few individuals, could be entirely reversed.
And those few individuals are the Russian oligarchs, men who had become billionaires almost overnight by acquiring state assets at fire sale prices.
Right. And these oligarchs guys like Boris Berezovsky and Vladimir Gazinsky normally hated each other.
They were bitter rivals.
They fought each other tooth and nail for control of industries. But they all happened to be at the World Economic Forum in Davos that year.
In the Swiss Alps.
And they see the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
If the communists win, they don't just lose their businesses. They might lose their freedom or their lives.
Yes!
So the text describes how they meet in a series of hotel rooms in Davos with a key political figure, Anatoly Chubai, who was managing Yeltsin's campaign.
Right there in those informal conversations.
Right there. They set aside their bitter blood feuds. They agree to pool their massive, newly acquired media empires, their television stations, and their banking resources.
A massive coalition.
They orchestrate a coordinated media offensive back home to ensure Boris Yeltsin wins. And it works. Yeltsin pulls off a stunning comeback and wins the election.
The course of Russian and frankly global history was essentially altered during a networking event in an alpine village.
It is a remarkable historical moment.
It really is, and Rothkopf uses it to brilliantly analyze the system's underlying incentive architecture.
Why they actually cooperate.
Exactly. Why did these fierce rivals suddenly coordinate? It wasn't because they were inducted into a mystical global brotherhood.
No.
The incentives driving them were purely structural and highly rational. The book outlines these incentives clearly. Career mobility, mutual protection, risk management for incumbents.
Risk management, right.
And above all, maintaining the stability of the emerging market system from which they all derived their wealth and power.
So they were just protecting their investments.
Exactly. If the communists took over, their institutional power bases would evaporate.
They'd lose the very things that made them the superclass.
Yes. Therefore, the author's analysis shows that the Davos Pact wasn't a movie villain conspiracy. It was a highly rational, incentive-aligned, informal bargaining session designed to protect shared assets.
They used the informal, insulated space of Davos to accomplish what formal national institutions could not guarantee.
They needed speed, and the informal network provided it.
So the takeaway here is that the system functions by aligning interests, not by issuing secret top-down orders.
Yes, that's exactly it.
It's about getting everyone on the same page because it's mutually beneficial. And another massive systemic mechanism for aligning those interests that the book dives into is what we call the revolving door.
The revolving door between the public and private sectors.
We hear this term thrown around in the news constantly,
Constantly.
And usually it's framed as a political scandal.
Yeah.
A politician leaves office and immediately goes to work for a defense contractor.
Or a Wall Street CEO is suddenly nominated to be the Secretary of the Treasury.
Exactly. The text points to heavy hitters like Louis Gerstner, the former CEO of IBM, moving over to run the Carlyle Group, which is a massive private equity fund heavily involved in defense and government contracts. Or someone like John Snow, who served as the U.S. Treasury Secretary and then seamlessly became the chairman of Cerberus Capital Management.
And once again, the author asks us to zoom out.
Look at the whole highway.
Yes. If we apply this systems-level analysis, the book argues we have to stop viewing the revolving door merely as a series of isolated individual political scandals.
It's not a glitch.
No. Rothkopf suggests that structurally, the revolving door is the access economy operating exactly as it was designed to operate. It acts as the connective tissue of the superclass.
What do you mean by the access economy?
The author posits that when you have top-tier individuals cycling continuously between the highest levels of government regulation and the executive suites of the private sector, it ensures two vital systemic outcomes:
Which are?
regulatory shaping and shared worldview formation.
Shared worldview formation. Let's think about the implications of that for a moment.
Okay.
When former Treasury officials become private equity executives, and private equity executives are appointed to Treasury positions, the system guarantees a specific outcome.
Right.
It ensures that the people writing the complex financial rules share the exact same financial language.
The same ideological assumptions about how markets should work.
And the same global priorities as the people who are supposedly being subjected to those rules.
It's like having the referees and the players swapping jerseys at halftime.
Exactly. They aren't just speaking the same language.
Yeah,
According to this analysis, they are fundamentally the same community of people.
they really are.
And the sources highlight a very specific, tangible outcome of this revolving door: the carried interest tax loophole for private equity firms.
Oh, this is a perfect example.
Let's look at this objectively for a second because it sounds like an incredibly boring accounting term.
Which I suspect is entirely by design.
Oh, absolutely by design. Carried interest essentially allows immensely wealthy private equity managers to have a massive chunk of their income taxed at the capital gains rate.
Which is significantly lower.
Much lower than the standard income tax rate. So, to put it simply, a billionaire hedge fund manager could mathematically pay a lower effective tax rate on their earnings than the plumber who comes to fix their sink.
It is a striking reality of the tax code.
It's wild.
And Rothkopf uses it to demonstrate a key structural point. The book argues that this isn't just an accident or a simple oversight by lawmakers.
Yeah.
It is a demonstration of how specialized revolving door access translates into highly favorable, incredibly lucrative policy outcomes for this specific network.
Because the people explaining the necessity of this tax structure to the lawmakers are often the very same people who used to be lawmakers themselves.
Or who sit on the same boards as those lawmakers. The access translates directly into policy.
And when you scale that up, it has massive implications.
Yeah.
If the people designing the policies are totally insulated from the consequences, you get some very specific results. The book talks about policy convergence.
Yes, the text connects these specific examples to broader structural outcomes. The author argues that when a global governance system is designed around this specific incentive architecture, an architecture of revolving doors, informal elite convenings, and shared institutional power bases, highly predictable results emerge globally.
Predictable results, like what?
You consistently see policy convergence around deregulation. You see profoundly insulated decision-making, and you see a massive inherent inequality of influence.
Could you give an example of that policy convergence?
Yeah.
Because the book mentions the Washington Consensus,
Right.
which is another one of those terms that sounds like a Tom Clancy novel, but is actually a very real economic framework. What was the Washington Consensus?
The Washington Consensus is a perfect historical example of this structural outcome. It refers to a set of specific economic policy prescriptions that became the standard package of advice for developing countries in crisis.
Championed by who?
Championed by institutions based in Washington, D.C., like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the U.S. Treasury.
Oh.
These policies were intensely focused on market efficiency. They demanded privatization of state-owned industries, deep deregulation, free trade, and strict fiscal discipline.
Essentially telling countries to slash government spending.
Exact.
In the book's critique of this,
Rothkopf's analysis points out that these policies generated by this elite network were structurally blind to the necessity of creating social stakeholders or building safety nets.
they miss the human element.
Completely. They prioritized paying down debt to foreign bondholders over maintaining local health care or education budgets.
Wow.
The book argues it's because the people designing and implementing these policies in Washington, London, and Davos were completely insulated from the ground-level social consequences of those policies.
Right. If a bus fare doubled in a developing nation because of a mandated subsidy cut, the architect of that policy didn't feel it.
Exactly. Their worldview was formed in the boardroom, not on the bus.
That insulation creates these massive feedback loops. As I was reading the author's breakdown of this, I was just marveling at the institutional reinforcement at play.
It is very systemic.
It is this perfect self-sustaining cycle. Let me make sure I'm getting the sequence right based on the text.
Let's trace it.
It goes like this. First, your wealth and your institutional base grant you access to these elite networks.
Check.
Second, that specialized access allows you to directly shape policy like securing a carried interest tax break or pushing for deregulation.
Right.
Third, that highly favorable policy expands your economic opportunities. And finally, those expanded opportunities generate even more wealth, which simply buys you even more access, and the cycle continues infinitely.
It is a continuous self-reinforcing loop, and the book asks us to critically examine how this loop fundamentally weakens traditional democratic accountability.
Weakens it how?
To illustrate this, the source material uses a brilliant, very evocative metaphor. It describes the modern nation-state as a Lilliputian desperately trying to tie down the global corporate Gulliver.
Like in Gulliver's Travels, where the tiny people are trying to use hundreds of little ropes to pin down the giant.
Exactly.
That is such a vivid image. How does the author apply it to the modern economy?
The author argues we have a situation where the speed, scale, and agility of global markets have vastly outpaced the slow, geographically bound reach of global law.
Because capital moves instantly.
Right. A multinational corporation can move billions of dollars across borders with a keystroke.
Yeah.
A national government, however, is bound by its physical borders and its slow legislative processes.
It takes months to pass a law.
Yes. And because of this asymmetry, the book asserts that national governments, even powerful ones, are forced to actively compete against one another for the favor of these transnational corporate entities.
Right, the classic race to the bottom. The country might offer to lower its environmental standards, or slash its corporate tax rate to zero, or weaken its labor laws, all just to attract foreign direct investment from a massive company controlled by a member of the superclass.
And the author's point is that in doing so, these governments are fundamentally eroding their own sovereignty.
They're giving up their power.
Yes, they are conceding their regulatory power to an informal, unelected network. The giant is too big for the tiny ropes of national legislation.
The nation-state is practically begging the corporation to stay.
That's the dynamic.
But what I found really surprising in the reading is that the superclass doesn't just dominate traditional business and finance.
No, it extends further.
The book shows how they've expanded this exact same playbook, this same networked approach, into global problem solving.
Yes.
This brings us to how the system interconnects with philanthropy.
A huge part of the network.
The text spends time examining things like the Clinton Global Initiative, and it paints this almost surreal picture. You have billionaires, tech CEOs, and venture capitalists standing on a stage with former politicians, publicly signing massive philanthropic commitments.
Right.
And the author notes that the atmosphere almost has the feeling of heads of state signing acts of international law.
It does feel that way because, according to Rothkopf's structural analysis, it is functioning that way.
How so?
The book reveals that philanthropy at this level has evolved into a literal form of global governance.
But isn't it just charity?
The author argues it goes far beyond charity. Why does this elite group take on these massive global initiatives like eradicating diseases or funding massive agricultural programs in Africa?
Because our formal multilateral institutions, organizations like the United Nations General Assembly or the World Health Organization are structurally weak.
Precisely. The book points out that they are tied down by endless national political squabbles, bureaucratic gridlock, vetoes from rival nations, and massive funding gaps.
And the superclass simply steps in and fills that void.
They do. They have the massive private capital, the agility to bypass bureaucracy, and the global networks to deploy resources instantly.
So they're essentially privatizing global aid because the governments are too slow.
That is the argument. And this perfectly explains the central question of the book.
Which is, why does this elite system persist?
Yes. It isn't merely that the superclass is power hungry. It is that they're heavily relied upon by the rest of the world.
Relied upon.
The author contends that the system persists due to sheer global complexity, massive information asymmetry, and a widely perceived competence in crisis management.
The book actually gives a great example of this crisis management with the Mexican tequila crisis.
Ah, yes, in the mid-90s.
Right. Let's look at that because it shows how this works in real time. In late 1994, the Mexican government suddenly devalued the peso.
Which triggered a massive financial panic.
Yes. Investors start pulling their money out of Mexico at light speed. The country is on the brink of a massive default, which could have triggered a contagion effect across Latin America.
And frankly hit Wall Street incredibly hard. The stakes were astronomical.
And how is the crisis resolved?
The book points out that it wasn't resolved by a slow, methodical vote at the United Nations.
No?
When a global financial meltdown of that magnitude looms, the author shows that it is the informal networks of the superclass who step in. The U.S. Treasury Secretary, key officials at the IMF, central bankers, and top Wall Street executives.
Who just jump on conference calls over a weekend.
Exactly. Over a single weekend, they rapidly coordinated a massive $50 billion bailout package.
$50 billion.
They bypassed the slow-moving formal treaties of nation-states because the market was moving too fast.
They were the only ones who could move fast enough to put the fire out.
Yes.
But the book also suggests that to make sure everyone is on board with how they are handling things and to maintain their legitimacy, they also have to control the narrative.
Narrative control is essential.
This is where the media and technology interconnection comes in. The sources bring up the legendary Google parties at Davos, which sound like something out of a science fiction novel.
They really do.
You have tech billionaires, A-list movie stars, and global politicians all mingling in the snow. And the text makes it clear that the superclass leverages this immense media and tech visibility not just for vanity.
Or just to look cool.
Right. They use it for narrative control.
That is a crucial synthesis of the book's arguments. By owning or heavily influencing the massive technology platforms and the major legacy media outlets, the author argues that this network gets to determine the boundaries of acceptable debate.
The boundaries of debate.
Yes. They influence which economic ideas are considered sound and serious and which ideas are labeled as fringe and subsequently ignored.
So they shape what we even think is possible.
In doing so, they are actively engineering consent for their policies, or in some cases regarding corporate regulation, engineering public inaction.
So it's all connected. The tech guys at the Davos party are hosting the politicians.
Who are deregulating the private equity guys.
Who own the media company.
Who shape the narrative about the politicians.
Wow. According to Rothkopf, what we're observing is the interconnectedness of nested systems.
Nested systems, yes.
Global finance, defense supply chains, technology platforms, multilateral institutions, and legacy media empires are not separate, isolated spheres operating independently.
Not at all. The book insists they are overlapping networks.
And they are managed by the exact same highly mobile class of individuals.
Utilizing the exact same playbook of relationship-driven coordination.
Right. Whether they are negotiating a massive corporate merger, shaping a climate accord through a philanthropic foundation, or deciding the moderation algorithm for a global social media platform.
The structural methodology remains entirely consistent. A reliance on elite access, informal coordination, and insulated decision-making.
Okay, let's pause the narrative right here. We have mapped out a tremendous amount of ground based on the source material.
We have.
We've looked at the author's definition of the system, the highly filtered demographics, the informal coordination at these elite convenings, the mechanics of the revolving door, the feedback loops of wealth and access, and the staggering reach of this network into global crises and media.
It is a massive framework.
It is. And I want to pull all these threads together for you listening right now. We have to ask the core question of this entire deep dive. What is the crisis in perception here?
That is the essential question to draw from this text, and we must answer it analytically by breaking down the author's structural clarifications.
Let's do it.
First, the book helps us define exactly what is being misperceived. The general public constantly misperceives global power as a hidden, malicious cabal plotting in secret.
Right, the smoke-filled rooms.
In reality, Rothkopf's analysis shows that power is a highly visible, networked institutional design. Furthermore, the public views phenomena like the revolving door as a corruption anomaly.
A glitch in the system that needs to be legally fixed.
Exactly, but the author argues that, in reality, the revolving door is access functioning as infrastructure. It is the system operating exactly as intended.
So we're looking for a secret realm, but the real power is just out in the open at a charity gala or a board meeting.
Exactly.
What's the second clarification?
Second, the book illuminates what structural layer is completely obscured from the public view. What is hidden is the access economy.
The access economy.
This is the stark reality that informal relationships and elite networking, rather than democratic votes or formal treaties, function as the primary governance capacity across public and private boundaries.
The true power lies in the spaces between the institutions.
Yes!
Which explains why people get so frustrated with traditional news. They feel like they are missing something.
Which leads to the third point. Why surface-level interpretation continually fails. Traditional media, populist politicians, and public outrage constantly fail to grasp the system because they are endlessly hunting for secret handshakes, illegal collusion, and smoking gun conspiracies.
Because they are desperately looking for a crime.
Exactly. And because of that, the book argues they fail to map the boring, perfectly legal, and highly effective incentive-aligned coordination and career mobility of the superclass.
It's hard to make a scandalous headline out of billionaire joins arts board and meets diplomat.
Even if that's where the real shift in power happens.
Precisely. And the fourth point.
Fourth, and finally, the text shows how a systems-level analysis permanently changes our visibility. Once you force yourself to view the world structurally, as the author does, the illusion drops.
You see the highway designer.
You finally see how sheer complexity, institutional legitimacy, and vast informality have successfully and quietly substituted for democratic accountability on the global stage.
That is incredibly sobering, but so clarifying when you really absorb it.
It changes how you view everything.
It really does. If the power of the nation-state continues to be eroded by the unmatched agility and immense capital of these informal transnational networks, what happens to the very concept of citizenship?
A profound question.
If our most urgent global crises, from climate change to financial collapses, can only be addressed by the superclass because our formal democratic institutions are simply too weak and gridlocked, do we just have to accept this new, unaccountable access economy as the permanent operating system of the planet?
It is something the book forces you to seriously mull over.
The next time you see a news report about a major global summit, a massive corporate merger, or a former politician joining a corporate board, I encourage you to look at it not as a standalone news event, but as a massive, invisible system performing its basic, everyday maintenance.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.